Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ryan Retro channel. The Retroid Pocket Classic and the TrimUI Brick are two of the best vertical handhelds on the market today, and two of the best handhelds on the market, period. But which one is better? There's only one way to find out. Fight! The two handhelds are sized somewhere between an egg and a banana. They're both pretty pocketable, especially the TrimUI Brick is really easy to slide into any bag and very easy to hold with one hand. The Pocket is a little bit bigger. It's a little bit harder to hold one hand, but it's certainly doable. It just doesn't quite fit one hand like a glove as the TrimUI Brick does, and it's definitely more comfortable once you get both hands on it. The back buttons are quite different on the two, so I want to compare those first. On the TrimUI Brick, you actually have 3 different back button options you can switch between. Now that's good because you can find something that fits your hands nicely, but the problem with them being replaceable is once you've taken them off a couple of times, they seem to just easily fall off, and they can be lost quite easily. So if you do find one that you really prefer, I for example prefer the stock squarish buttons, you might want to put some glue on here and try and glue them in place. That's something I'm going to try soon. Looking at the rest of the back of the devices, they're both plastic on the bottom half. The Retroid Pocket Classic extends all the way to the top in plastic, whereas the TrimUI Brick has this lovely metal at the top, which acts as a heat sink to get some of the heat out of the device, and also feels very premium. But the downside is, given that it's acting as a heatsink, you can feel it get pretty hot when you use it. So when you do hold the device, you want to not really put your hands on this area too much if you can help it, because it does get a bit toasty, especially when playing more demanding games. The Retroid Pocket Classic, on the other hand, rather than a heatsink, has a fan, which you can feel blowing out of these vent holes on the back, and it doesn't really get very hot in the hands. The shoulder buttons are not replaceable, which means they won't fall off, but you don't get that customization. I will say though, they are pretty comfortable, and I think for most people, they wouldn't want to really change these. They're nice and ergonomic. You may also have noticed another feature the Brick has which the Pocket Classic doesn't, which is this lighting under some of the keys and where the cartridge would go on a Game Boy, something I really like. There's also matching lights on the front, and these lights automatically change depending on the game system you're playing. So as I cycle here through different gaming systems, you're going to see the lights change. Game Gear is purple, Game Boy Advance is pink, Game Boy Color is yellow, MAME is a kind of pale bluish purple, and you'll see that reflected on the back as well. If I keep flicking between them, you're going to see these colors update as I move around. It's a really nice little touch, and I especially love this little piece here where the cartridge would go. It really gives me the nostalgia of having a cartridge in the back. Both devices have volume buttons on the side. They're both nice and clicky, but the ones on the Classic do stick out quite a lot, and it's very easy to press either the volume buttons or the power button by mistake. On the Brick, they are slightly more pressed into the body, and you're not going to press them by accident in that way. And in this case, the power button is on the other side. There's also one more switch on the TrimUI Brick, which you can set to do many different things, as you also can with these 2 LED buttons here. I have this switch set up to be a mute button, just like I have on my iPhone, which comes in nice and handy. I have the first function button here turning on or off those LEDs, so I can just easily and quickly enable or disable them. And the right button switches between using this D-pad as a regular D-pad or emulating an analog stick in systems like N64 that require an analog stick for movement. In comparison, the Retroid only has one modifier key, which by default maps to the Android back button, and a double press is the Android home button. But considering this is Android and has a touch screen, it's easy to just use finger gestures and multiple other ways of controlling the device, so you don't really need a modifier key in the same way you do on the Brick. Both have nice D-pads. I would say they're very comparable. The start and select buttons are also similar. They're both nice and clicky. Once again, the Retroid Pocket Classic ones do come out of the body more, and the TrimUI Brick ones are much more recessed into the body. But again, they're both nice, both clicky, and both easy to press. And here the TrimUI Brick has one final menu button, which serves as the main menu button on the device to bring up things like the RetroArch menu, and in many ways is similar to this menu button on the Retroid Pocket Classic. When playing an N64 game like Super Mario 64, both of them, out of the box, won't do anything because you need to map the D-pad to the analog stick. The TrimUI Brick makes this really easy because by default this button switches between between the D-pad and the analog stick. So just with one click like that, you're playing the game. The Retroid Pocket Classic, on the other hand, doesn't have any kind of button like that. You instead need to swipe down from the top of the screen. You need to come along and find a button for this. It might even be hidden in a deeper menu like this. So I found that button, I dragged it all the way to the top, so that now when I bring up the notification panel, it's right here, Enable Virtual Joystick. And by toggling that on, we are once again controlling the game nice and easy. So it is easy on both devices to change the behavior of the D-pad, but it comes straight out of the box on the TrimUI Brick. You do need to dig around a little bit more on the Retroid Pocket Classic. The face buttons on both once again feel pretty similar. They do feel a little bit stiffer on the Retroid Pocket Classic, and once again they do stick out of the body more. They're more recessed again on the TrimUI Brick, just like all of the other buttons. They're nice and easy to press, and both of them are nice and clicky. The buttons on the TrimUI Brick make a higher pitched click sound, whereas the slightly bigger buttons on the Retroid Pocket Classic make more of a big, thick, chonky thonky sound. And in true Retroid fashion, they're also a little bit noisier. Let's now check out the speakers here. We have one big mono speaker grill here on the Retroid Pocket Classic and two smaller stereo speakers on the TrimUI Brick. So as you could hear in that example, there is a far more deep, full, rich and loud sound coming out of the Retroid Pocket Classic. The sound is by no means terrible on the TrimUI Brick, but the much smaller device does have the much smaller sound, as I guess is to be expected. But for the kind of sounds you're listening to on a device like this, old Sonic and Mario games, I think it's perfectly good enough. But later we will get into more uses for the Retroid Pocket Classic that can utilize that speaker. So how do the devices feel in hand? Well, they're quite a similar weight, with the TrimUI Brick being 159 grams and the Retroid Pocket Classic being 223 grams. Of course, the Retroid Pocket Classic is heavier, but that weight is stretched over a bigger size. So in hand, they feel very comparable. One area where both devices shine is the screen. The screens on both of these, especially for their price point, are excellent. The TrimUI Brick has a 3.2-inch 1024 by 768 screen, which works out being 400 pixels per inch, which is really, really sharp. It also has very nice viewing angles and is an IPS non-touchscreen display. When we compare that with the Retroid Pocket Classic, that has a 3.92-inch 1240 by 1080 screen at 419 pixels per inch, so slightly more than the TrimUI Brick, but both in and around that 400 ppi range, which is higher than MacBooks and iPhones. They're both incredibly sharp, and the Retroid Pocket Classic has a couple of improvements in that it's an OLED screen, which means black is truly black and completely blends in with the bezel here. And it also has the advantage of being a touchscreen, so we can navigate this device with the touchscreen, which is fantastic for getting into games quickly and opens up many more possibilities as well. The TrimUI Brick has a beautiful stock firmware, which is usually referred to as CrossMix OS. It's really easy to jump between different systems, and my favorite feature is that it has a built-in search box, so you can quickly search for any game you have from any system. Let's, for example, search for FIFA, and it's going to show all of my FIFA games across all of my systems I could possibly play right now. You'll notice a star next to some of them, which are the ones I've added to my favorites. I can just simply click on the game, and I'm straight into the game I want to play. We can then press the TrimUI menu button, and we get a really nice, simple little menu to save games and load games. There is an advanced menu available which takes you into the full RetroArch menu, but for people who feel overwhelmed by this, or just simply people who don't want to have to deal with this many settings options, the built-in TrimUI menu is excellent because it boils it all down to the bare essentials and just gives you what you need. Save a game, load a game, continue a game, exit a game. That's all you really need. The Retroid Pocket Classic, on the other hand, is an Android device, so when you get it, it's either going to look like this, or you can use the Retroid launcher, which looks pretty nice, but is missing quite a lot of features compared to other launchers, so I wouldn't recommend using this. I would instead recommend Daiji Show, which is completely free and I believe suits this device perfectly. It's so easy to flick between different systems, you can still access all of your Android apps, you can pin games you want to jump back into later, you can quickly jump into the Android settings if you need to, you can add favorite games on each system, and my favorite feature, just like the TrimUI Brick, is it has a built-in search function. Just hit the Y button, type the game you want to play, so let's once again type in FIFA, and just like on the TrimUI Brick, we now have access to all of our FIFA games, and we can jump straight into them, just like on the TrimUI Brick. One thing you may have noticed so far in this video is that the screen on the Retroid Pocket Classic is quite a bit brighter than the screen on the TrimUI Brick, so I took both of these outside to do a daylight test and see how well they coped in broad, bright, shining daylight. I'm happy to say that both of them are perfectly viewable in the sunshine, and they look better than they look on the camera. So while the Retroid Pocket Classic is brighter and will be even more viewable in daylight, the TrimUI Brick is also perfectly viewable. And if you can find a little bit of shade, you're going to be gaming happily. So what gaming systems can these handhelds actually run? Well, as we look through the TrimUI Brick here, it comes set up with all of the systems you're going to be able to play. So obviously you have very easy old arcade games like Atari systems and Capcom machines. That's going to be very easy to run here. We also have Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, the Game Gear, the Genesis. All of these will also run very nicely. The systems that are really going to push this to its limits are PlayStation Portable and Dreamcast. So let's jump into a quick comparison of Dreamcast on both of these devices. First, here is Virtua Tennis 2 on the TrimUI Brick, and you'll see it's not really running very well. It's a little bit laggy, and while it's technically playable, and I have played this quite a lot during my travels with the TrimUI Brick, it is certainly not getting a very good frame rate here. I would say the frame rate's probably around 12 to 15 frames per second. Definitely not a great experience and clearly pushing the Brick to its limits here. But I still think it's impressive we can play 3D Dreamcast games on something this small and cheap. But let's now move on to the Retroid Pocket Classic, which is a much more powerful device and can very easily play this game. Here you're going to immediately notice the difference in smoothness. It looks like it's running in a perfectly smooth 60 frames per second. It is flawless and also looks incredible. This is definitely a nice little Dreamcast machine. And as one more example of a more demanding system, this is PlayStation 1, which actually runs pretty well on the TrimUI Brick. It's definitely playable, but that will depend on the game you're playing. Some of the more heavy titles on the PlayStation 1 might stress it out a little bit. Here is World Cup 98, my favorite PlayStation 1 game growing up. And while it runs pretty nicely here on the TrimUI Brick, it looks even nicer here on the Retroid Pocket Classic, on that bigger, brighter screen, and once again, lovely performance. But when it just comes down to the gameplay and how they feel to play, I would say they're pretty even. Where it is not even, however, is all the other systems the Retroid Pocket Classic can play. It can play the PSP very well, which really struggles on the Brick, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Wii, and even some light secret console games, which I actually made a whole video about. And while it doesn't play most of those systems flawlessly, it is possible to run them, which it just simply isn't on the Brick. Here is FIFA 15 running on the Wii, something you would definitely not be able to do on the TrimUI Brick. But most of those systems would benefit from an analog stick, and when it comes down to games that primarily use D-pads, these devices are pretty even. So how is the battery life when playing games on these? Now these tests absolutely blew me away. You are not going to believe the results I got from these because I couldn't believe them. I grabbed my handy little timer and I put it to the side and I tested some light games and some heavier games to see how long these devices would run. I set up my action cam and this is able to record for 9.5 hours, which I assumed would be more than enough to make these comparison videos. It was not. That was not enough time because one of these actually lasted quite a lot longer than that. So first I tested out Game Boy Advance, something that easily runs on both systems. I set the power mode of the Retroid Pocket Classic to the standard performance mode. There's no need to really push this hard on just Game Boy Advance. I loaded up Minish Cap and I held down a directional D-pad button with a keyboard key to make sure there was always movement happening on the screen. I also set the brightness on both devices to 50%. And the TrimUI Brick lasted for 6 hours and 19 minutes. That's not too bad, especially considering that there was always movement happening in the game. I think that's a pretty respectable result. But the Retroid Pocket Classic was absolute nuts. I started filming this at 5:25 p.m. Hours later, I had to go to bed and it was still going. So I turned off the lights and kept it running. I woke up in the night at 3:46 a.m., 10 hours later, and there was still 50% battery left on the Retroid Pocket Classic. So if it keeps going in that same way, it was going to last 20 hours. That is nuts. So for my next test, I ramped up the performance a little bit. I went to Dreamcast, pretty much the highest performance game the TrimUI Brick can at least somewhat play. I put the brightness up to 100% on both devices. I turned on high performance mode on the Retroid Pocket Classic. I put the fan on sport mode. And once again, I set a timer. Running through the intro scene on Crazy Taxi isn't the best test, but it was hard to find an idle test that would work on both. The TrimUI Brick died in 3 hours and 40 minutes, so about half the time with 50% brightness playing Game Boy Advance. But once again, the Retroid Pocket Classic just wouldn't quit. Even with 100% brightness, high performance mode, the fan is making a sound as you can hear now. After 5 hours and 10 minutes, I decided this time to just check the battery level, just check in. It still had 66% battery left, which again, if it keeps going in that same way, that's going to be 15 hours. 15 hours of maximum brightness, regardless of the power of the game, whether it is a really intensive game or just a looping video like this intro, the fact that it can play that for 15 hours with full brightness is, again, it's just madness. So I thought, how can I kill this thing? What can I do to it? So I decided to play a secret console game, one that I affectionately call Exhale of the Crazy. This is a game that barely even loads on this. You can see light flickering, textures loading in and out, it can barely handle it. Once again, high performance, 100% brightness. It lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes. So what have we learned here? Well, the battery life on the TrimUI Brick is pretty good, but the battery life on the Retroid Pocket Classic is insane. If you want to buy a device purely for battery life that you want to bring with you and don't need to charge it often, this is just an absolute killer device. I also then counted how long it takes to recharge them from 0 back to 100%. The TrimUI Brick took 2 hours and 45 minutes to charge back up to 100%, and the Retroid Pocket Classic took 1 hour and 45 minutes to get to 99%, and then it just seemed to stick on 99% for even more than half an hour. I'm not sure how long it takes to get that extra 1%. But if you at least want to go from 0 to 99, it's quite a bit faster than the TrimUI Brick. And that was in both cases using the same high-powered cable and high-powered charger. So battery life here is absolutely crazy. But now let's talk about why you would pick either one over the other. Let's begin with the Brick. Why would you pick the Brick? Well, first of all, the ease of use of this is unmatched. Once you get it out of the box, press the power button, you're straight into a game selection menu, and if you buy one of the preloaded cards, you are ready to just jump into games right away. And if you buy an empty card, you simply need to just add your own games onto the SD card, and once again, you're ready to just jump in. But if you don't really like this firmware it comes with, you are not stuck with this. There are plenty of custom firmwares being worked on by the community. There is MinUI, NextUI, PackUI, Nully. There are so many different options. I actually love all the custom firmwares so much. I actually bought a second one just to play around with those. So this is my second TrimUI Brick running NextUI. It is a far more minimalist operating system. You just scroll through your device names like this. I'll choose Game Boy Color. Then I have all of my artwork here ready to jump into a game. And the best part is once you jump out of a game, it remembers what you were playing and it has a thing called a game switcher built in, which is even better than the pinning mode I have in Daijisho on here. The game switcher, by just pressing the select button, lets me instantly jump back into all the games I was just playing. So if I want to jump straight back into Sonic the Hedgehog 2, right where I was, I just choose that game. And within a couple of seconds, I'm back exactly where I was. And then by pressing the TrimUI button and the select button together, it takes me back out, it saves where I was, and then I can jump into another game. Let's say I now want to jump into International Superstar Soccer Deluxe. I just press resume on that one, and here I am, ready to jump straight back into another game. Once again, press these two buttons. Let's say I now want to jump back into my Street Fighter game. Press resume. We are once again playing Street Fighter. It is just so convenient and probably my favorite operating system I've used on any handheld. So definitely here, the custom firmware options are excellent. But as I said before, if you're someone who doesn't want to mess around with that, the stock one is also just so easy and so great. With that built-in search bar, a favorite menu, a recently played menu, it has so much going for it. And I also think it feels more solid and premium than the Classic. The Classic is all plastic, and while it feels quite nice, it feels quite cheap. Whereas the TrimUI Brick actually feels like good quality all throughout. The metal back, the hard plastic feels like it could survive many drops, truly living up to the Brick name. The slightly more recessed buttons feel like they can also take a lot more hits, and everything just feels a bit more premium than the Classic, which is really nice given the fact it's quite a bit cheaper. But then on the other side of the coin, why would you choose the Retroid Pocket Classic? Well, the Retroid Pocket Classic has a lot more power to play a lot more systems. Where the TrimUI Brick can kind of play a little bit of Dreamcast, the Retroid Pocket Classic can absolutely chew through Dreamcast games. On the TrimUI Brick, I can kind of play Crazy Taxi, whereas the Retroid Pocket Classic can perfectly play Crazy Taxi. So if you do want to play those slightly more demanding systems like Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, some PSP and light secret console titles, it's actually possible on here, and it's really just not very playable on the Brick. So for your extra money, you are getting more performance. You're also getting a beautiful OLED touchscreen, which definitely comes in handy in many situations. While you don't get all of those different custom firmware options like you do on the Brick, you instead get Android. The possibilities with Android are near endless. There are so many different front ends you can pick, such as Daijisho, which I showed before, or the beautiful ESDE, which also runs really nicely on here, looks incredible and gives a similar experience to these. But Android has a lot more going to it. You get access to the whole Android game library, which include games like Balatro and Stardew Valley, which you can get Portmaster ports on the TrimUI Brick, but they run so much better on the Retroid Pocket Classic. These are games that have been ported by the developers themselves to run flawlessly on Android, and the experience is so much better. And Android these days is basically like a full computer. So you can connect keyboards, mice, gamepads, and all kinds of accessories to this. You can have apps like Chrome, so you can find and download any resources you might need without needing a computer that you would need for one of these. And you can get creative and download all kinds of other apps as well. I've downloaded Local Send, which is my favorite way to send over files between my different devices. I've installed YouTube Music, so I can use this as a little music player whenever I'd like to, with that big speaker on the front, and I've installed BandLab so I can even create my own music on this. Beautiful. And this will be part of a future video I'm working on showing different uses for these Android handhelds, so watch out for that coming soon. As I mentioned before, the battery life is also much better on this than the TrimUI Bricks, and there's also a 6-button model of this available as well. If you grew up playing the Sega Saturn or Sega Genesis, that could be great for your nostalgia too, and makes it quite unique in the handheld scene. I personally went for the more standard 4-button variant because that just feels more comfortable for me. I do also think there are better colorways available for the Retroid Pocket Classic too. This is the Pokemon variant, which I believe is based on an old yellow Game Boy, but to me reminds me of my limited edition Pikachu N64 I have at home. So I really like this for the nostalgia, but they have some beautiful colorways available. The TrimUI Brick also has some nice colorways available as well. This one reminds me of my grape Game Boy Color, so I absolutely adore this. And this one I bought just because it's quite minimalist and goes well with all of my other black handhelds. So there are nice choices here too, but I do think the Retroid Pocket Classics do look a bit nicer. But obviously that's personal preference, and I will be putting them all on the screen so you can see and decide for yourself. So with all of that said, with everything compared, taking into account the screen, the buttons, the game choices, the price, which one do I think is better? Well, I don't want to be one of those YouTubers who says it depends, but it kind of does depending on your budget and what you want from a handheld. But in this VS series, I'll make sure I give my definitive answer on what I think is the best one. So what do I think personally is the best? It has to be the TrimUI Brick. And that comes down mostly to the price, but also for the premium feel and how easy it is to grab it with one hand, throw it in a backpack without worrying about it too much, and taking it on your way. I've babied the Retroid Pocket Classic. I've only taken it outside a couple of times because it just doesn't feel very strong. The plastic is very soft. And while it's hard to see, I've even got some slight scratches on the back already, even though I've been really careful with it. The TrimUI Brick I've taken on so many trips at this point, and it looks almost flawless. Whenever there is a slight mark on the back, I find I can just wipe it off, whereas the Retroid Pocket Classic seems to scratch forever. That might just be my experience, but by feeling the two devices, this certainly feels like a nicer material. The Retroid Pocket Classic is definitely much more powerful, but I do find most of those systems you can play more powerfully with this, I would like to play with an analog stick. And the ones that do primarily use the D-pad are older systems, in which both of these run very nicely. One more issue I think the Retroid Pocket Classic has is the emergence of the Retroid Mini V2, which has the exact same screen, is almost the same size, but has two analog sticks and a far more powerful processor. Once again, that obviously comes at an increased cost, but I do think it could be a better investment than this one, unless you do just love the appearance of this. If you're looking for a vertical handheld, I think something like this is a better overall purchase for the price. And price really is the deciding factor here. In the thumbnail of the video, I said that the Retroid Pocket Classic is $129 and the TrimUI Brick is $79. I got those prices from the official websites of the two companies. Retroid are not really known for their sales. They price their devices quite aggressively already, so there's not too much wiggle room to lower the price down. So it's very unlikely you're going to see a big price drop on this anytime soon. And if there is a sale in the future, it won't be by more than probably $10 or $15. It's already quite low for what you're getting. The TrimUI Brick, on the other hand, is sold by so many stores on websites like AliExpress, and they're all competing with each other for the price. This drops incredibly low. I just checked at the time of making this video, and it's available from multiple outlets for $52, which is just mad. And in the past month or so, I actually saw it fall even below $50, meaning you can get almost 3 of these for the price of one Retroid Pocket Classic. And that is where I really think this is a better pickup for the price. Now, if you're somebody who thinks $129 is nothing, that's peanuts to you, then of course go for the Retroid Pocket Classic if you're okay with the bigger size. But I think when we compare everything fairly, power, performance, features, and value, I have to give this win to the TrimUI Brick. And the other reason that made me decide the Brick has to be the winner for me is this is the one I take with me every single day. Whether I'm going to work, whether I'm going on a trip, if there's one handheld I'm going to throw in my bag among all the handhelds I own, it's always the TrimUI Brick, because it's small, it's easy to pick up, it's easy to jump in and out of games, and it truly is built like a brick. If you do instead opt for the Retroid Pocket Classic, I have no doubt you'll be very happy with this too. It's an incredible device for $129, and it can just play so many things it has no right being able to. So choosing a winner wasn't easy, but when it came down to it, I have to think about the price and which one I actually take with me daily. And every time I leave my home, whether it's going on a trip or going to work, I always put the TrimUI Brick in my bag. So for me, that has to be the winner. But that's what I think. What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. If you think the Retroid Pocket Classic is much better than the Brick, I'm not going to put up a huge argument against you because it's also fantastic. You really can't go wrong here. So jump in the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with you about these two excellent devices, and let me know what other devices you'd like to see me put together in the next episode in this Versus series. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a like and subscribe if you didn't already, which really helps me out and just makes me happy. And I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next time. Bye.